I'm going to turn things over to Director Christy Whitfield to say a few opening remarks before we turn things over to Elena Fowlkes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. We really wanted to have this session because we know that there's a lot of tough times being had by our businesses, and I wanted to really thank, I wanted to thank the OCFO. I wanted to thank the Taxpayer Advocate for joining with us to just try and demystify some of the problems that are being had by our business community, and really just get together to get some information from the actual source. We know that, that the mayor and the council had tried to relax some of the sales tax obligations for small business during the early part of this crisis. And then we know that there had been some problems. I want to also really commend our Main Street advocates for bringing this issue up into everybody's knowledge. And so I thought the best way to answer and to try and get information out there was to really just get us all together. So I reached out to the OCFO, and they said, okay, we'd be very happy. And so, I wanted to just thank everybody for quickly responding. Well, quick for government. And pulling this session together very quickly. So with that, I just want to say, we don't have a lot of easy answers, but we will have factual answers. And the goal of this session is to get people information from the source, to say, here's what you do, here's what is true, here is what is not true, and then here is the process to get your questions answered. And so, I think that will be step one. And then we will sort of go to steps 2 and 3 and 4, because we know that our businesses are suffering, and we know that these are really tough issues for everyone and really tough times for everybody. So again, thank you to the Main Street for bringing this to my attention. Thank you to the OCFO and the Taxpayer Advocate for coming out to make this information available. And then this will be ideally the start of open communication, and not a one-off engagement. And it's our commitment to continue to have these conversations and to continue to keep these lines of communication open. So with that, I will turn it back to Kate and say again, thanks for everybody for just digging in these tough times to try and make sure that we are doing everything that's possible for our businesses and for our city.
Thank you, Director Whitfield. I'm just going to turn things directly over to Elena Fowlkes, who is the Taxpayer Advocate for the District of Columbia. She has prepared a slide deck. If you are a call-in user and unable to see this slide deck, it is something that we'll send an email shortly after the presentation today so that you can get a copy of that deck. For those of you who have questions and have already submitted them, we've already provided those to the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, so she knows what some of those questions are. And then if you have additional questions throughout the session, during the session, please put those in the chat, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that everyone's question gets answered. So Elena, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Department of Small and Local Business Development, not just for reaching out to us in order to be able to communicate this information directly to the business community, but for putting it together and marketing this event. Ultimately, we do have information, but it doesn't do anybody any good if we can't get it into the hands of the people that actually need it. So for that, I'm really grateful. And I also want to say thank you to everybody that took time out of their day on this rainy afternoon to either call in or to be a part of this WebEx presentation. And I wanted to encourage everybody that if you have questions that don't get answered, or you have additional questions that come up after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help. We're here to be your liaison and your advocate. And, we're happy to help you with whatever you need. So I'll just start off with some quick housekeeping items on the next slide. First of all, if you have a matter that involves your tax account, so your individual tax account or an issue that is specific to just you, please send us an email for assistance. I'm not going to discuss individual account information on a public forum, So I'm happy to give information regarding policies or regarding general, the general approach to something or the general rule. But if it involves, questions about a tax balance or questions about an individual tax decision or determination on your individual account, I'd be happy to follow up with you offline regarding that matter. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to the questions that you do have. And from the ones that I saw in advance, I believe that the information that we're going to share today will address all of the questions that have been asked previously. So again, if you have a question that doesn't get answered, or if you need any additional information, you can send us an email at taxpayeradvocate@dc.gov. And we're happy to follow up with you afterwards. Or if you have something unrelated to the sales tax abatement and involving any other matter with regard to DC taxation, you're always welcome to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to connect you with where you need to go or the information that will help you resolve your issue. So just by way of introduction, my name is Elena Fowlkes. I'm the Taxpayer Advocate in DC's Office of Tax and Revenue. The Office of the Taxpayer Advocate is actually a new function of the DC Office of Tax and Revenue. We've been up and running since January 1st. Our mission is to ensure that all taxpayers are treated in a fair and equitable manner and consistent with their taxpayer rights. So I'm on the next slide. I'm sorry. I'll say that as we move forward to help the host keep up with my transitions. So the way that we achieve our mission is we work casework, outreach and education, and systemic advocacy. So as far as casework, we do handle individual cases. Once someone has a matter that has been unresolved or has they've been unable to get a determination that they feel is consistent with DC tax policy and regulation, they can reach out to us and we intervene on their behalf. In addition, we participate in events like this, outreach and education, in order to avoid problems from happening in the first place, to let people know not just their obligations, but also their rights as taxpayers within the District of Columbia. And then finally, we work on systemic advocacy, which is internal advocacy to just make the system better and more efficient overall for everybody. Today's topic, if you'll go to the next slide, is the COVID-19 response and the Emergency Amendment Act of 2020 sales and use tax. So in conjunction with a lot of the other administrations within OTR and the CFO's office, we prepared a frequently asked questions that was supposed to hopefully address some of the more frequently asked and more confusing aspects of the COVID-19 response. We received a lot of questions and a lot of concerns regarding what people could do during this time in order to get some relief with regard to their sales tax. And so hopefully this presentation will address some of those questions. If you could go to the next slide. So the first question that we received a lot of is, what sales tax relief did the council pass in response to the current public health crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic? So on March 17, 2020, the Council of the District of Columbia enacted the COVID-19 Response Emergency Amendment Act of 2020. And this act amended the DC Code and expanded the authority of the Office of Tax and Revenue to abate interest and waive penalties for failure to timely pay sales and use tax for the periods February and March 2020, providing that certain conditions are met. All vendors who are required to file sales and use tax returns either on a monthly basis or quarterly basis are eligible for this relief, with the exception of hotels and motels, which were specifically excluded in the legislation. So accordingly, if a vendor timely filed their returns for the periods for February and March, but didn't pay the tax due, OTR automatically waived the interest and penalties that would have ordinarily been assessed, provided that the tax was paid by the due date of July 20th. And in addition, OTR made the determination to also waive the interest and penalties, even if the sales tax returns were not timely filed, so long as they were ultimately filed and paid prior to the July 20th period, and that includes the periods of February and March. So I think that there was some confusion initially around this because at the beginning, our systems were programmed to allow an automatic abatement for those taxpayers that filed timely returns for the February and March periods. And anyone who filed a late return did have the penalties and interest populate on their account. So if they had logged into their My Tax account, then that penalty and interest would have popped up on their account. And I think that created a lot of confusion. And, you know, for that, I want to apologize to, you know, for the stress or for any confusion that was created. However, that was just the way that our systems were programmed in order to address that. And ultimately, once that deadline came and we were able to see who filed and paid by the deadline that was imposed by this legislation, all of those taxpayers that were able to file and pay their February and March returns by that due date were then those penalties and interest were abated. So now if they were to log into their accounts, they could see that those amounts have been taken off. So if you can move on to the next slide. So the mayor extended the stay-at-home order. Does this mean that the due dates for sales tax payments are extended as well? So we did receive a lot of questions, and there seemed to be some confusion around the fact that as the mayor continued to extend the stay-at-home order, whether or not that meant that, you know, April, May, June, July, and those future periods were just automatically rolled into this emergency legislation. And the answer is no. The emergency legislation gave the Office of Tax and Revenue authority to waive interest and penalties for late payments for the periods ending February and March, February 29th and March 31st, 2020 only. And any periods beyond that are due and payable as normal, and they're not subject to any provisions at this time, special provisions at this time. And the reason for that is simply that OTR is subject to the law. You know, we have to follow what the law says, and if there isn't special legislation or special provisions enacted by the DC Council, then we just don't have the authority to make any further abatements at this time. So as of right now, only the February and March periods were subject to that deferral until July 20th, and all other periods were just treated as normal, and you know, the returns were due, the payments were due at the regular times. And we've tried to be clear in updating the information on our website as well as our social media to make sure that people were aware of what those due dates were. If you could go to the next slide. So we also received a lot of questions, especially after the filing deadline came for the February and March periods, but prior to the payment deadline of July 20th. People asked, I didn't pay the sales tax for February and March 2020 periods by the due date of July 20th. For what periods will I owe penalties and interest? So this is interesting because the February and March periods were deferred until July 20th, but that deferral only applied, you know, and the abatement of penalties and interest only applied if that payment was made in full by July 20th of 2020. So anyone who didn't make their payments by that due date had the penalties and interest going back to the original due date. So if you, for example, didn't pay the February 2020 period by the July 20th deadline, then you would have penalties and interest accruing for that March, April, May, June, July, up and to the present date for all unpaid periods. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified for everybody that's on the line. If you could go to the next slide. People asked a lot, I misunderstood the requirements of the emergency legislation and I filed my returns late. Do I qualify for relief? So ultimately, the Office of Tax and Revenue put into place an automatic abatement for those taxpayers who timely filed their returns for February and March. However, all the taxpayers who filed late but paid all taxes due by July 20th, the Office of Tax and Revenue decided to also exercise its authority under the emergency legislation and abate the interest and penalties for those periods as well. So if the returns were filed and paid from February, March by July 20th, then that those accounts should have been automatically updated once that filing deadline and the payment deadline had passed. You could go to the next slide. So the next question, it says, I filed my returns on time for February and March, but can't pay the balance. What do I do? So at this point, your best options are to set up a payment agreement by logging on to your MyTax portal and requesting a payment plan, or by contacting the Collections Administration via email at compliance@dc.gov. Or you can also call compliance at 202-724-5045. If you have an outstanding balance, getting on a payment plan and making the required payments will be important for maintaining your clean hands eligibility. So ultimately, you will be unable to get a clean hands certificate if you have a delinquent balance. However, if you're on a payment plan and you're regularly making payments, you should be able to continue to get that clean hands in order to stay in business, and you'll be able to pay your balance off over time. So, as we kind of go through this presentation, I know that there are people who, who simply just can't pay anything towards their balance at this time, just because either their operations have been severely impacted by COVID, or they find themselves just in a financial position of being unable to make those payments. And we'll discuss those options as we move forward with this presentation as well. So can you move on to the next slide? So I think I might be one slide off. I'm sorry. Can we go back? So I answered that one. All right. So can we move forward? I'm sorry, I'm making this complicated. So one of the other questions is, my business was closed in April and May, but I didn't have any sales. Do I have to file a sales tax return for these months? So you should be filing a sales tax return for any months that you were in business. So long as you were still an active business in the District of Columbia, you should be filing those sales and use tax returns. If you didn't have any sales, you would just report your sales as zero. And filing these returns is what's going to prevent you from getting the delinquency notices from OTR. If we just don't get returns from you, there's going to be that assumption that you are not filing and reporting your sales and remittances in an appropriate way. If you, on the other hand, closed your business and are not planning on reopening, and that's it for you, then you can file a return and mark it as your final return. So there is a mechanism for that as well. However, just because you don't have sales for a particular month doesn't mean that you don't have an obligation to file anything for that month. So be assured that those are still getting filed. If you had zero sales, then you won't have penalties and interest, because there's nothing to calculate the penalties and interest on having had a zero sales tax. Can we move on to the next slide? So, and that's the next question. My business closed permanently. I simply will never be able to pay off the tax due. What are my options? So the best option at this point is you can file an offer in compromise, asking OTR to settle your tax debt based on a comprehensive financial analysis of your income, assets, and expenses. If we ultimately determine that you cannot pay your total liability, it may be reduced based on the information that you provide. There's more information about the offer and compromise process. I believe that either these slides will be made available, or the additional information will be made available after the presentation is over. And that should contain a link to these FAQs that I've gone over. And in that slide, or in that information, is the link to the offer and compromise process on the OTR website. Generally speaking, there is an application form, and also there's the financial disclosures. And the financial disclosures will allow you to list your income, your assets, your liabilities, your expenses, And then you'll have to provide third-party documentation to support all of that information. Somebody at OTR will carefully review all of your documents, and then they'll make a determination as to whether or not they believe that you are able to pay anything towards this debt. And the options, they might say, well, you know, they can pay nothing, they have no assets, they have no income, and then we may be able to compromise your debt that way. Or they might make you a counteroffer and say, well, you know, maybe you can't pay all of it, you know, here's a different amount, maybe you can pay that. And, or, you know, ultimately, if it's determined that they believe that you have the sufficient assets and income to pay the tax liability, your offer will be denied. So, however, I would encourage anybody who is ultimately, you know, struggling and unable to make those payments to go on our website and look up the information for the offer and compromise and see whether or not that's something that they might be able to fill out and be a part of in order to get some relief on their tax balance. And the reason for doing that instead of just letting it sit is to avoid any personal liability that might come with a tax balance that is attributable to a business. So can we go to the next slide? So here's some contact information for anyone who's not able to see the slides. You can contact our customer service line at 202-727-4TAX, and that's the line for any general questions. If you you know, have you know, just you want a quick update, you need some quick information, the customer service administration would be happy to help you. If you have a request for the compliance administration, their phone number is 202-724-5045. And that is really your contact for if you are requesting an abatement, if you need a payment plan, or if you have some additional information that you need with regards to the collection of the actual tax debt. You can also reach them via email at compliance@dc.gov. And if you need to reach out to the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, the best way to reach us during our modified operations is by emailing us at taxpayeradvocate@dc.gov. And, you know, we're here as your liaison, as your ally. We can get you information. We can reach out to administrations that you have been unable to reach or unable to get information from. If you feel as though, you know, there's a process that isn't transparent or isn't fair or it just isn't working for DC taxpayers in general, you know, we're happy to intervene on behalf of one or many of the district residents who are facing issues with the Office of Tax and Revenue. And so, you know, again, if you have any questions with regard to this presentation or any other DC tax matter, please reach out. The Office of Tax and Revenue, you know, is committed to its taxpayers and committed to the business community and, you know, wants to make sure that everyone is equipped with the information that they need in order to move forward during this very difficult time. And I believe the next, okay, so I have a question. It says, at what point should a business reach out to the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate? Is there a point when it is too early or too late in the process? So generally speaking, we like to say that we require that a taxpayer exhaust its, you know, other remedies before coming to us. So, you know, we probably shouldn't be the first stop. You know, if you get a notice and the notice has instructions on who to contact, you should contact them first and see whether or not you can get the information that you need from there. But if you, you know, feel as though you have frustrated all your options and you've exhausted all the other avenues in order to get help, you know, definitely come to us. And if it's too early in the process, you know, we can always direct you to who it is that you need to talk to. You know, we are ultimately we're here to help. So, you know, so if anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to answer them here. So it says, could we quickly define abatement and deferral in terms as they relate to tax? So deferral is just when a deadline is moved. So when I mentioned that the deferral of the sales tax payment deadline was, you know, it was deferred the February and March deadlines to July 20th, it just means that it was moved, it was delayed, so that people got some additional time in order to make that payment. And then as far as abatement, an abatement is just when something is removed. So if we're abating your interest, we are taking it off of your account. So hopefully that clarification is helpful. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Elena, thanks so much. This is Kate coming back from DSLBD. I was just going to ask a couple more quick questions. If folks have questions, please do type them in so that we can make sure that we are getting those answered. But going back to the very beginning, you mentioned that the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate is relatively new. Could you say a little bit about how new the office is and sort of where people can find you on the website?
Sure. So we actually came to be about January 1st of this year. So we've been around for about 8 months. The ways that people would be able to get a hold of us, at least prior to our modified operations due to the COVID-19, they could call, they could email, they could send a letter. We really would accept a request for assistance however we were able to get it. Currently, due to the modified operations, really the best way to get a hold of us is either by sending us an email to taxpayeradvocate@dc.gov or by filling out the web form. And the web form is available on our website. So you can either navigate to the OTR main website at otr.cfo.dc.gov, and there is a menu of options, and you can locate us on the screen there. Or you can go straight to taxpayeradvocate.dc.gov, and that should also give you the opportunity to not just get more information about our office, but also information on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and to request help directly from the website by filling out a web form.
Elena, thank you for that. And then I have dropped a link directly to their site in the chat, and that is both available on the current Eventbrite page and the follow-up email that we will be sending. I don't see any more questions on the February and March sales and use tax abatement here. If we get more, we will definitely send those to Elena, or you can reach out to Elena and the Taxpayer Advocate directly. I did want to take just a quick moment, as you had made reference to clean hands, to ask if you could share a little bit about how people might, when and why people might reach out to your office regarding the clean hands process, and maybe just by starting out with a really quick definition of what clean hands is, as I know that process has changed this year.
Sure. So I know that the clean hands, it's referred to as different things in different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions consider it a tax compliance certificate or a certificate of compliance. It's really just a certification that somebody is compliant with their tax obligations and it's necessary in order to maintain their business license. So in order to do business in the district, you do have to have a certificate of clean hands. And there is, certain statutory authority as far as who is allowed to get it. I believe as far as taxes go, you can't owe the district more than $100 in taxes. However, there are certain options in order to get a clean hand. So if you have a balance you can't pay, but obviously you want to continue to do business, you can set up a payment plan, and that process will keep you in compliance for the clean hands purposes. And if you reach out to us, with regard to clean hands, a lot of times what we see is something that you may dispute, or there may be an error, or something that you need cleared up in order to be able to get the clean hands. And those are requests that we normally handle on a case-by-case basis. So if you come to us and say, I didn't even realize that this issue had been going on, but I tried to get clean hands and it says I owe and I don't understand, we can come in and intervene on your behalf, figure out what's going on, and help you get that cleared up to the best of our ability, so that you are able then to go ahead and continue with your business and maintain your clean hands status. So hopefully that answers your question. I can also go through the list of questions that were received in advance, especially if there are people on the call who don't have access to the chat box, if that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful. And then when you get done with that, I'll have one additional question, but why don't we do those questions first?
Perfect. So one of the questions that did come through in advance is, somebody wanted to know, whether or not they could get a refund if the taxes had already been paid, or if the penalties and interest had already been paid, whether they could get a refund of that amount. So ultimately, I recommend that everyone who feels as though they were charged the penalties and interest for the February and March period, go back into their MyTax accounts and check to make sure that those amounts have been abated. So those penalties and interest should have been taken off the account so long as the base tax was paid by the July 20th deadline. So some of those accounts, instead of really mailing a check to your address of record, may populate with a credit. And that is the approach that OTR is taking at the moment, is that anybody who has an overpayment with, that resulted either because they already paid it or they didn't realize that this abatement would be coming, the amount that was already paid will be reflected as an overpayment in their account. But rather than being refunded directly to them, it is going to be applied as a carry forward. So if you have a future liability, that can get applied that way. Now, if you have questions about that, or you want a refund of that amount instead of having it applied as a credit, I would encourage you to contact me directly, and I'll give you some additional information about the process that we put into place in order to make sure that everybody gets their questions and concerns addressed with regard to the refunds of those overpayments. And then, I think that some of the questions that came in advance really were just wanting the overall information about sales tax and the sales tax process, and really how it was being adjusted for this COVID-19 emergency. And one of the things that I want to leave with the people that are on this call is that OTR is not really where the policies get made. The laws are drafted, and we enforce the laws with regard to collecting the taxes. So if the statutes and the legislation say, this is the tax, this is what it is, these are the things that are being taxed, this is the tax rate, these are the due dates. OTR only has the authority to make changes to that when we are given the authority within the law. So that's one of the reasons that we couldn't really go in and abate additional interest or abate additional penalties. And also I saw a question about what about the abatement of the tax itself. We can't take that off because any adjustments that we make to the accounts really have to have a basis in law. And if there isn't a basis in the law for us to go in and make the adjustments to a taxpayer's accounts, we just simply don't have the authority to do that. So OTR is doing, what it can do within the bounds of those established laws to help people to the extent that we can. But ultimately, we have to collect the amounts that we are required by law to collect. So, that's something that I want people to understand, is that the Office of Tax and Revenue really is bound by that legal requirement in order to collect what's due. And, we will try to work with whoever needs assistance and whoever is facing a hardship, but we're limited to what the legislation allows us to do. Let me see if there's any other questions about anything else. I think that those are the questions. That covers everything I think that we received in advance. There's a couple of questions with regards to individual account issues, and I would encourage those individuals to log into their MyTax accounts and double check to see whether or not those the questions that they had can be answered by an update on their individual accounts. So, just go in and double check your MyTax and see if you still have a question. If so, feel free to reach out to me individually.
Elena, thanks so much. I have just two wrap-up questions, and then we'll wrap up our session. And we so much appreciate your being here today, and everyone else who is here. Just as a reminder, everyone, this session was recorded, and we will be making it available at a later date. And if you're interested in these PowerPoint slides, we will also be making those and the FAQ available again. The FAQ is already available. But Elena, just to wrap up, if there are additional changes made to sales and use tax liability or additional abatements that do come through the law, how would people find out about that if that happens? And then in addition, if you know this, do you know what the next due date is for people to file and or pay sales and use tax in the district?
So the best way, I guess, to keep up with the things that are happening with regard to the modified operations due to the COVID-19 pandemic are to keep up with our OTR's website. So if you go to OTR's website, the very first thing that you'll see when you log onto the page is a link to our COVID-19 operational updates. And our communications team has been excellent with keeping that up to date. Any new legislation, any new updates or policy approaches are all reflected on that page. In addition to that, I know they're keeping the social media pages up to date. So if you follow OTR on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, then those updates get posted to those accounts as well. So any information that is relevant to, DC taxpayers or DC businesses is frequently updated online through those avenues. And so, in addition, I believe that with regard to the changes in the sales tax, anyone who is registered for a My Tax account receives some sort of an automated notification with regard to the some of these changes. So if someone is on the call and they don't have a My Tax account, that would be the first step, is to make sure that you're registered online, that you are, frequently checking the portal, that you are, keeping up to date on that. So thank you for posting that in the chat. It's mytax.dc.gov. And that really is your first stop, is, just to educate yourself and make sure that you're keeping up to date on your accounts, your business accounts, but also following OTR on social media and keeping an eye on our website to make sure that you have all of the latest information there. And I'm sorry, there was the second part of that question was, what's the next filing deadline? So the next filing deadline is going to depend on whether you are a quarterly or a monthly filer. So the returns would be due as usual for the July. So the July would have been due, at the normal time. And then, so if your returns are due on a monthly basis, you'd be paying for the prior month in that regard. So I can pull up the specific due dates. And then if you're paying quarterly, your quarterly due dates would come, every 3 months, and you would keep up with that. But the only ones that were deferred and moved outside of the normal rotation were the February and the March returns. So those are the only ones that were kind of moved off schedule.
Well, thank you so much. And I think, I think if you're signed up in mytax.dc.gov, you may also be able to get reminders or see those due dates. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Well, Elena, I want to thank you so much for sharing this information with us today. As Director Whitfield said, we hope this is the first of many to help get information directly to our businesses. We really appreciate the time that you've taken. We appreciate everyone who is on the line here. And we will go ahead and close out. Thank you, everyone.